study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for October 19th, 2020. Thank you all for joining us. We have a good agenda tonight. We have item number 1 is a staff report, a cortical wellness grant application that we'll be talking about. Item number 2 are ordinance addressing the unlawful removal of notices, no trespassing on public and private land, and pedestrian safety along roadway is item number 2. Item number 3 is ordinance establishing local system for reviewing campaign finance complaints. And then item number 4 will be elected officials reports. As we generally do with our meetings, we will start off with public comment on any item that is on the agenda. So any of those 4 agenda items you may speak about. We have a 3-minute speaking limit. When you come onto the line, if you would give us your first name and your last name and spell your last name for the record and give us your address, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak on any of those items. So with that, if you would like to speak, do we have any, raise your hand in the Zoom format on the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand in the Zoom format, and we'll go. And before we start our meeting, I'd like to say that we have all of our counselors with us tonight, except for Ms. Hoppy from District Number 1. So thank you, counselors, for all being here. So anyone wishing to speak tonight? Ms. Scheck.
Mayor, I've unmuted one caller and I don't see anyone else with their hand up.
Okay. If there's anyone either on the telephone or on the Zoom feature, raise your hand in the Zoom, speak up if you're on the telephone, and we'll bring you into the meeting and listen to you speak. We'd love to have you. Don't see anyone from the public that wants to speak on anything, so thank you. And we will close our citizen comment and go to agenda item number 1, and I will go to Mr. Goff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Commander Sulcer is on the line to talk about this. We just need a consensus from City Council to allow us to apply for this grant, which is a requirement of the grant. So, Shelley.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. What I am here for today is to ask for your approval to submit a grant application to the state of Colorado under DOLA for a peace officer's mental health grant. Basically, what this grant will allow is for the police department to provide a wellness application, a smartphone application that can provide some immediate access to wellness tools and resources. Our officers are tasked with handling a lot of very high risk, urgent, and dangerous events within our community on a regular basis, as well as a lot of our professional staff are dealing with supporting our police officers through some of these stressful incidents and dealing with people that are coming in, citizens that are coming in, and it's creating some barriers that with our current EAP program, they don't have immediate access to some assistance for mental health, for dealing with persons with mental health disorders, things like that. And it's creating some emotional and behavioral issues that if we don't treat those immediately, it can create some risk not only to our officers and our employees, but also amongst the community members. So this application, the smartphone application, is a safe and private way for our employees to have resources any time of day or night, immediate access to those. And so we're asking for the ability to submit this grant that would give us approximately $100,000 over the term of 4 years for this application to be used by all of our police personnel. The Cortico Shield Wellness application, we've done quite a bit of research kind of under the guidance of our chaplain, Scott Moore, And we've not been able to find any other application or a similar application that would provide the same benefits as this particular smartphone application. One thing to note on this as well is that I attended a law enforcement roundtable that was hosted by CIRSA, our insurance company, and this particular application through Cortico was recommended by CIRSA to all of the law enforcement agencies that attended this roundtable, that this really was kind of the trendsetter and the forefront for being able to provide some of that immediate assistance to our staff. Again, it's $100,000 over the term of 4 years, and it would provide unlimited access by all of our police personnel to anything that's available in this application. It's also has the ability to be customized to provide information that is relative to our local police department, as far as counselors and different education programs and training programs that deal with job-related mental trauma. So again, we would just ask for your authorization and your approval to be able to submit that grant.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions from council. Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So some of my questions are concerning whether this would be confidential and what exactly kind of resources would come out of the application. And are there any kind of like HIPAA laws that are going to be following along with this as well?
Yeah, everything that is included within this application is confidential. Officers and employees would have the ability to reach out to any of the persons or the counseling services, any of these resources on their own and without having to go through any sort of notification process. And everything that's part of this application would be free to that individual.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question was along the similar lines regarding confidentiality. And how does this application address core requests or Freedom of Information Act related inquiries, or does that come into play with respect to this app?
It would not come into play. Anything that is accessed within this application would be confidential, just as say an individual would reach out through the EAP service, that unless there is a specific immediacy as far as the safety of that employee, the information that is obtained through this application would be confidential and not available for any sort of records requests or anything like that.
Okay. No, and I think that is important. And in the memo, it mentioned the fact that many first responders are reluctant to reach out. And that is one of the issues, I think, as it relates to people's reluctance to reach out, is the confidentiality of something like this. So that I think is important, and I'm glad to see that.
Right. And this would allow officers at 2 o'clock in the morning, if they have some sort of traumatic incident, anything like that, they would have immediate access where, under the current EAP program, a lot of those resources aren't available during off hours, or they would have to wait until the next business day to be able to access some of those things through the current EAP program.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wish that there were 4 grants that could be used for this program. I totally support it, and I know that it's needed, and yes, let's go for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments for Commander Salzer? Mr. Urban?
I'd like to make a consensus to move forward with the application of this grant.
we have a unanimous consensus on that. We're not able to take an official action because we can't vote at this meeting. So if you need to have an official city council resolution or vote on it, we'll need to see about that. Is that correct, Mr. Goff? Or
We don't need official formal
Okay.
action.
okay, well, you certainly have unanimous consent of the council. And I had one question. It looks like this would be a valuable program ongoing. Actually, I had two questions. Number one, the services that are provided with this app are connected to real people, right? And so it's right on target for help for the individuals that are using the system. And I guess secondly, think out 4 years, how would this be funded on going forward? Any thoughts on that?
There is the opportunity at this point. I actually spoke to Chaplain Moore earlier today, and there is the ability right now to negotiate with, if we were to be awarded this grant, there's the ability to negotiate with Cortico to allow us the ability to actually extend this out 5 years. And then from there, we're hoping that with enough interest and enough involvement by other agencies, that this program will actually become much more economical and easier to access. So we would have to look at that in the future as far as how we would make that ongoing.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
there is an opportunity for that to actually become a little more cost effective.
Okay, and I'm sure if these are good tools as technology improves and communication does, that these will follow that trend. So anyway, thank you very much for bringing this tonight.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, our second item on the agenda are ordinance addressing the unlawful removal of notices and other things. So we have Mr. Goff, but I think Mr. Dahl, are you the lead point on this one?
Yes, I am. Yes,
All
I am.
right, please take the floor.
Council, you have in this particular item 3 separate ordinances, two of which are one of which is completely new, and two of which amend ordinances that the code sections you already have in the Wheat Ridge Code. They are largely modeled on ordinances adopted by the city of Arvada. I believe council had previously gotten a presentation or seen materials from the city of Arvada on persons trespassing on public and private land and hindering the movement of vehicles, persons present on highway medians. And this is a topic, of course, that's of great interest throughout the country, and cities are increasingly moving to address the dangers occasioned by persons on highway medians that aren't intended to be occupied for any length of time other than to provide, as the ordinances describe, a temporary refuge while you're crossing the street with the light. So all 3 of the ordinances address that fact pattern and related fact patterns in various ways. It's probably best if I make mention of significant issues in each of the 3 ordinances, and we can take questions on them as a package, perhaps. They do kind of interrelate, and some questions you might have on the first one might be answered after discussion on the second. I'm delighted to see the chief is on the line here as well, and might have some thoughts for you and be able to answer some questions from the department standpoint, from a kind of an operational standpoint of how this might be applied. The purpose, of course, here is to gain direction from you. These are draft ordinances close to ready for adoption by council. I plugged in all the citations from the Wheat Ridge Code and took out the Arvada ones and made some other changes. So they're pretty much ready for first reading, but obviously it's study session. You may wish to give us some additional direction and carve some things out and suggest other additions. But let me tell you about the package, then we can take questions. Will that work?
Looks, sounds like a good idea.
Okay. In no particular order, the first ordinance is the just straight up trespassing. The city code has a very short trespassing section. It's code section 1646. And what I did here in looking at the Arvada version was to choose to simply repeal and reenact the city's ordinance. It's very, very short. And all the city's current code are reflected in larger ways here in this ordinance, which has a legislative declaration that recognizes the rights of public and private property owners to not be trespassed on. It includes definitions, something the present city code does not have. Mentions signage, which will be important for the second ordinance we're going to look at. Makes it unlawful to remain on property without authority, or if your authority has been granted, it's been denied, taken away, revoked, and creates a new offense of failure to obey a no trespassing sign, which is going to relate in a minute to the next ordinance. You'll notice from a policy standpoint, and something I would like the council to think about in each of the three cases. I'm on the second page of the ordinance, letter F, what the penalty is. You'll notice that it includes fine or imprisonment not to exceed the limits established in code. Code section 1-5 is the city's general penalty provision. It gives the municipal court judge the authority to imprison for up to a year, or really 364 days, having recently been changed. And I think it's $2,650, and that number will go up kind of regularly under the statute. You have a policy choice here, and in most cases, we defer to section 1-5, and we say both fine and imprisonment are available to the judge. For some actions, however, from a policy standpoint, and you've got the right to make fine and imprisonment available for any violation of any city code section. But occasionally, the council makes the decision to eliminate prison or jail time, right, as a potential penalty. You'll notice that's not done here for trespassing, because that's an injury really to the property of another, and could well be that activity is the nature of the trespassing. Obviously will vary all the way from a transitory trespass where I'm walking across your front yard and I'm gone, and probably shouldn't be put in jail for that, to someone erecting a tent and fighting to stay there. And as a policy call, I want you to think about that. Obviously, it would ultimately be up to the judge to determine this, and it's rare, as I think Judge Randall has told you in previous times, it's rare for him to impose jail for things like this. But it's a policy call that I want to bring to your attention, so you think about it. We'll see the same issue coming up in the next two ordinances, where I made a different policy call, or at least I suggested a different policy call. So that's an enhancement of the city's existing trespass ordinance to kind of follow the more detailed policy and procedure that Arvada has. Turning to the second ordinance, and we have an available code section in our code. Code section 1647 is vacant right now, it's reserved. So it was handy, I was able to put this new section, which we don't have at all in our code now, as the section right after the trespass section, making it unlawful to remove no trespassing signs, and making that a violation. You'll notice there are definitions. Employees of the city are allowed to do this. The unlawful act is the removal of the sign. And you'll notice that, again, the penalty section, letter E on the second page, calls out just a fine, under the theory that there's probably no circumstance under which we would think that someone should go to jail for removing a sign. You have the right to require it, but you'll notice kind of the difference in degree of the seriousness of the potential offense. But that's the policy call there. I think the importance of this particular ordinance to Arvada, or at least why they put it in their approach, their kind of comprehensive unified approach, was to be able to really address some encampments that they had underneath the I-76 and some other freeways in the city, and to be able to post that notice so that they are on firmer ground when they come to the point of telling people that they've got to leave and that it's trespass. Not required necessarily, but really helpful to be able to say to the judge, we posted a notice and then we enforced. We posted a notice and they kept taking it down, and we enforced that. So that's not a feature that I see in a lot of codes, but Arvada has taken this, I think, to the next level in terms of thinking about what a comprehensive approach should be. And they have added that offense of removing a sign, something that a lot of cities don't have. But again, this is, I think, supportive of their comprehensive approach. And I wanted to describe it to you, the council, in those terms. The third ordinance is the longest. And this has us adopting two due sections and revising a current section of the code. And it has to do with the issue I raised at the beginning, which is being on and remaining on the medians of streets in a way that's unsafe. There's a fair amount of legislative or whereas clauses, so that's your legislative intent, legislative history. Operative sections of the ordinance start on the second page with this pedestrian hindering the flow of traffic. Again, a legislative declaration that compresses the whereas clauses that you saw previously, makes a definition. And the key unlawful act is letter C, unlawful to unnecessarily hinder, obstruct, or delay a person who's lawfully driving in traffic. Doesn't apply to a person in a crosswalk who entered the crosswalk and is there for the period of time necessary to cross the highway. Again, you'll notice letter E, the penalty is a fine and not imprisonment. Again, a policy call for you. But that's hindering the flow of traffic by effectively being on the highway in some way. And we'll get to medians in a minute. And that's the next section in this ordinance, which is 16-70, which is a new section for the city. I've seen this in other cities as well. First, again, the legislative declaration calling out the safety reasons for prohibiting people from hanging out on medians. The particular location of medians for this purpose is higher speed roadways, and Arvada plugged it in at 30 miles per hour. That's a policy call, and I very much appreciate the police department's thoughts about that, whether that's the right number or not. But that's the higher speed roadway upon which you may not linger on medians, and if you do, you're subject potentially to enforcement. Definition of temporary pedestrian refuge area are the crosswalk that's designed for you to be there temporarily. Then the unlawful act, so the heart of the ordinance, letter C, unlawful for you, a pedestrian, to be there if it's been posted, yes, on a center median that's been posted that's not designed or suitable for your use other than to simply cross the street. And there's some exceptions. When you're crossing the street is an exception. Law enforcement officers are an exception. City or state employees, utility companies. These are the people that may need to linger on a pedestrian median in a street, but don't need to. They need to be there for a longer period of time. In any event, there's some other definitions, and again, the penalty, letter G, a fine not to exceed the limits in 1-5, which now I think is still $26.50, but there's no jail there. Lastly, we have code section 16.113. That's a code section that presently exists in the city code. And you see the changes that are made. The new material is in all caps. The existing city code material is in upper and lower case. So there has been a legislative declaration added, which supports the sort of policy call of prohibiting sales and solicitation in certain places. The material that's in regular upper and lower case letters B, C, and D are the existing code. And most cities, the heart of this particular is letter B. And I want to draw your attention to it because you see this in all the city codes that have this kind of provision on prohibiting solicitation on a street or highway. The action which is unlawful is if you're entering that highway in a way that does one of these three things. Causes you to enter into the travel portion of a highway, so into traffic, involves you performing activity, i.e. giving money or taking things from someone upon a median area, or the person performing the activity can't do so without a legal parking area. So perhaps you've got a sign that says, and you're on the sidewalk, and the sign says, fresh peaches, you know, and you see that, I see that, we all do it at that time of year. So long as there's a place for you to pull off into a parking lot after you see that sign, that's fine. But if you have to basically stop your car in the travel portion of the roadway to purchase the peaches, then that's not. So again, this is existing city code, but it's being enhanced by a legislative declaration and by a definition of interstate highway. So that's kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of the ordinances to kind of match up with what Arvada is doing. And I'm happy to take any questions. Chief, are there some things you want to point out to the council before we take questions? I apologize. I didn't have a conversation with the chief ahead of time, and I don't mean to impermissibly put him on the spot.
No, thanks, Jerry. All I'll say is that there's really two tracks. I don't want to conflate the issue here and say they're all designed to deal with one issue or another. There are issues that we have around the homeless population, persons experiencing homelessness, and then there are traffic safety issues. I would add, I know I sent to Mr. Dahl some of the National Highway Traffic Safety studies that demonstrate that vehicle collisions at the speed of 30 miles an hour are much more dangerous and deadly than they are at other speeds. But also, you know, that we've had I think four fatal collisions and one serious collision in that area over the last year. So data supports the safety aspect of, I think, some of these traffic laws that we're talking about, but that is very separate and different from where we're dealing with ongoing issues around persons experiencing homelessness in certain areas of the city. So I would just want to point that out.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Dahl. We'll open this up to questions from council. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
I had a question about the trespassing one specifically, and what how much like trespassing, if we're not talking about people who are experiencing homelessness, like how much trespassing is happening? Is that something, Chief Murtha, that you have off the top of your head? What I'm trying to get at is that if it's a necessary thing outside of homelessness, people experiencing homelessness, then we should address that issue. But I feel pretty strongly that issuing, a fine to people who can't afford to pay their rent or take care of basic needs, I don't really understand the need for that.
So I can't give you statistics off the top of my head. I think Jim Lawrence is on here, and I asked him to look into issues around it. But let me suggest that I've also had conversations with Judge Randall, and he's very sensitive to the idea that we would be issuing fines to people who can't pay them. His thought process, and I don't want to speak for him, but I'll just relate the conversation, was that he would look for alternative outcomes such as community service or that sort of thing. But we do spend an inordinate amount of time and resources cleaning the same places over and over again. And to be perfectly honest, we remove people from areas that they're not supposed to be in, and it's almost a circular rotation. Then the next person backfills and we move the person ahead of that. So it becomes an ongoing struggle, and it really is a drain on resources. Where there are other issues, there are persons who choose to live an urban sort of free lifestyle, and they will park vehicles, they will trespass in areas that are also either private or public that they shouldn't be in for the periods of time they're there. They leave trash, they leave human waste and that sort of thing. So there is an element of that. I don't know if Jim Lawrence is on, if he wanted to add anything to that. He might not be on the in this room.
We're not getting good audio right now.
Yeah, I'm not hearing.
Okay, well, I would just suggest that the bulk of it is persons experiencing homelessness, but that could be in a number of forms: people in vehicles and people setting up encampments and setting them up in a lot of the same places we see on a regular basis. So that's sort of my thought on that, if that gets to your question.
Yeah, it does. It does get to my question, and just as a follow-up to that, I mean, I know that both community service officers and police officers are spending a lot of time on these calls, and would a citation help in, fixing this problem? Or, the officers are already out there and interacting on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. And I just want to know if this is actually solving for the problem, or if it's just kind of looking like we're doing something here.
Yeah, let me give you two schools of thought. Number one, you see Arvada's ordinances, and what I see happening in talking to my peers is that different councils take different actions, and so it tends to be there is a very robust communication between persons experiencing homelessness as to where the most welcoming community would be. And so right now they land a lot on Wheat Ridge, because Wheat Ridge has less stringent requirements than other areas. So by default, we are accepting right now probably an overrepresented number of people into our community because we're the weaker of the laws in the area and the weaker of the ability to enforce them. So that I think is part of the issue. The other part is there are no consequences right now. So I think, we've spoken about homelessness in general. There are no consequences around misbehavior in homeless persons. So they know that. So the consistent trespassing at private property, where we issue a citation, we come back and issue a citation. We want to get them in front of Judge Randall for some of these alternate sentences and at least put them on notice, because these are conversations I've had directly with some of the persons experiencing homelessness. They understand the situation we're in, and this would give us better footing there. So again, I'm not sure I answer 100%, but yep.
Thank you. Ms. Hulteen?
Thanks, Chief.
Mr. Goff, did you have something to add to that?
Well, thank you, Ms. Hulting. I was just going to add maybe to that, and to answer Val's question. We don't believe any one of these ordinances is the answer to homelessness, of course, or other issues we're having in our community. But as we mentioned several weeks ago, we were going to bring these items to you just as some additional tools for our police department, because we get numerous calls daily and emails daily about why isn't the city doing anything. about different issues, and some of these issues that we believe that these ordinances will at least help. It's not going to solve the problem, but we need some more tools.
If I can just add one more thing, Mr. Mayor, on the traffic issues, I think that stands by itself, separate, Ms. Beck, just to let you know that is a true public safety issue to have folks. I think that, that goes without saying, but I just want to make clear that is to protect not just, the persons experiencing homeless who might be in the road, but drivers. We've seen, collisions. We had a fatality last week up there for a person experiencing homelessness. So those enforcement actions give us more authority up there to protect that group, that population that seems to transit that roadway more than any other place we have.
Okay. Additional comments or questions, Ms. Hutchinson?
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering about people in the medians. I know the fire department walks down the medians with their big boots, and they are collecting money for, good services and things. Is that something that still will be allowed?
Not under this draft, because it raises the same safety issues as me standing on that same median asking for dollar bills. And I recognize that happens out there. I recognize that we are, as public officials, are very supportive of the work the fire department does, but there's no less safe way to do that. They can do the same thing the guy that sells the peaches does. If they want to do that, pull over into the parking lot and make your donation. I have seen that taking place, but that's not a distinction that the city can or should make. And I recognize it means that the fire department will have more trouble, won't be able to use that technique, but it's unsafe, no matter who's doing it.
Sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Hultini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, first of all, just recognize, I realize this is a big issue, especially in districts 4 and 2. I have a couple things, and I'm going to focus right now just on the specific trespassing sign issue, and then I'd like to address the pedestrian one later. So first of all, several times there's been a reference to a specific roadway or stretch of roadway, and I'm not sure where you guys are referencing. Can somebody let me know what the roadway is that is being referenced tonight?
Are you talking about a specific reference in one of these draft ordinances, or just what people's been?
Yeah, in the discussion tonight, there's a couple times people have said that roadway or, that place, and I'm not sure where people are referencing specifically. I realize it's citywide, but there seems to be a specific area that people are referencing.
Yeah, I think when they're mentioning that, I think those most generally are speaking about I-70 Kipling area.
Okay.
But we have the same issues at Wadsworth, 32nd Youngfield. I think our biggest issue is I-70 Kipling right now.
Okay. So I have two questions. One, I have two questions and I guess just a comment. What's the difference now? Like, what can be done now without this ordinance being adopted? Like, how, I realize that there's not an authorization to fine or possibly sentence, but how is this currently handled? And I guess the second part of that question is, what would be different? Like, how would our police department realistically follow up on tickets that have been issued to enforce them and make sure that they've been paid? I mean, it seems like it's a population that's hard to ticket and hard to enforce the ticketing. So I'm just sort of curious, like, what the differences would be if this was enacted as opposed to what we're able to do right now.
Well, I can begin with an answer and maybe the chief can follow up.
Okay.
I'll give you the more kind of structured answer. The trespass language is enhanced and references the posting of signs, something that our code doesn't have now. And then there is the posting of signs. Those two things together in the first basically two ordinances that you have here, make proof of trespassing easier in the municipal court. So that's kind of the pure trespassing side of things. Mechanically, I think it's probably easier in municipal court, and it adds legislative declarations that are supportive of the policy. For the third ordinance, the ordinance about the ordinance about medians, the city doesn't have that at all now. The hindering traffic in medians, the city does not have that at all. And so if I'm soliciting in a median or hanging around in a median, we don't have a direct tool for that now. We've got the solicitation forcing people to go into the travel lanes of the highway, but that's not the same as just a median safety ordinance. The solicitation ordinance tunes up the existing ordinance we have with a legislative declaration, again, making prosecution in municipal court a little easier. Chief, I'm sure I missed some things there.
Well, thank you for covering the solicitation ordinance. And I think, part of the confusion that comes in there is that from one jurisdiction to the next, if you've got different ordinances, people expect a police response where they've seen one before, and then they don't get one from the city of Wheat Ridge. So there is an expectation that arises because people might have been successful in calling in a complaint and having it resolved in their favor in other jurisdictions. So that's part and parcel to that. It makes our jobs difficult when we say, well, Wheat Ridge, we do it differently, and then we have to explain that. It's certainly your direction, and we can continue to explain it, but if we're more even-handed across jurisdictions, it certainly leads to less confusion for our citizens. And Mr. Dahl, you'll tell me where I'm wrong on this, but where the trespassing one comes in, I think bringing that ordinance into place gives us an opportunity to bring people to our municipal court and to have some resolution. Right now, we struggle, and we've been considering alternative methods to bring in folks who have multiple warrants for certain crimes that the jail won't accept them for that they used to pre-COVID. And we have some ability to talk directly to our own judge and say, if we brought them in, we know we can't put people in jail, but can we find alternative means to clear out some of these warrants and also put people on notice that their behavior is unacceptable in some way or another. So there is an enforcement tool there that I don't think we currently really have in our tool belt. And Mr. Dahl, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you are. That's accurate.
Okay, thanks. I guess my closing, and again, I'm mostly focused on the trespassing. A concern I have about this, I guess it's twofold. One is I am a little bit concerned about just sign pollution. I think we have a lot of signs in the city. If you drive down any one of our corridors, I think there's a nice archaeological history of our city and signage. So I'm wary that this could lead to, a lot of signs telling people where they can and can't be, and that doesn't feel like an inviting community to me. And then I also am just really cognizant, like we're close to having our homeless navigator on board, and I feel like there's a programmatic aspect of this in terms of how we do outreach and connect people with services. And for me, before actually taking this to council for consideration, I would be really interested in having this come back again with our navigator in place to talk about sort of how that other coordination piece goes with the business, because we know that there's specific problem spots, and I think it's really valuable for that holistic piece is like, how does this tie into how we do outreach, and where are they going to go, and what kind of services are they going to get? Because they're not going to go away. They're gonna move around to other places, and I just want to make sure that we've got those eyes and ears and expertise as part of the conversation. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Lorenz, you want to respond on that, or go ahead.
Yeah, just in reference to the signs, I understand there's a balance with the sign pollution effect. This particular ordinance allows us to, if the sign exists, then we can go out and we can enforce without doing a notice. Right now, when we contact people, if there are no signs posted, we have to give them a notice. We give them a written notice that says you're not supposed to be here, and then they can leave, and we would have to come back later on and then determine whether or not they have been notified before in the past before we can enforce a trespass. And I think property owners are frustrated by that to some degree, that we repeatedly are giving notices, verbal notices, and not able to track those. But if a sign is posted, as Mr. Dahl has written here, we can enforce, because the expectation is that a person has seen that notice and they are on notice. That so it just saves the department and I think the property owner a lot of difficulties. And then I would just say one more thing about giving the Judge Randall, the flexibility to deal with particular cases of, these chronic, aggravated, or repeated circumstances that he could deal with a lot more effectively than they're being dealt with now. And then one more thing I would just mention, that when we had this, we had a pedestrian killed just last week that the chief talked about a little while ago. We did an interview with Telemundo the next day. Commander Hunt is a fluent Spanish speaker and was doing an interview with Telemundo. And while he was doing that interview, we had 4 people that walked through as they were filming, violating this crosswalk in just a manner that had occurred the night before. And that was just in a span of 30 minutes while they were recording that. So it is a problem that really needs to be addressed for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Stites, and then Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think Chief Lorenz might have answered one of my questions in there, but as somebody who owns a business on the mouth of the Greenbelt, this is becoming quite an issue for us and our landlord as well. And we've had the police here probably 3 or 4 times the last couple months. We've had parents and different people assaulted almost and things like that. So I really do think that this no trespassing thing is kind of becoming important, because there doesn't seem to be a stick. We have lots of carrots, but our stick is pretty ineffective at this point. So we do have to have some sort of resistance and some reason for people to not want to trespass on people's property. And where I'm looking at some of the signage and where I'm thinking a lot of that is going to go is a lot of the no trespassing signs, and tell me if I'm wrong, a lot of that's going to go in alleys and places that the general public probably won't see it, right? We're talking about no trespassing signs coming on private property and in places where, if you're just driving by, you're not going to see, but if you're trying to get back into the alley or somewhere where somebody's trying to hide, where somebody's trying to sleep, we have people, probably standing 20 feet from where people are camping, in our green belt. So there's things that we need to do, I think as city council, that while they don't sound nice, our citizens that do pay taxes and do own businesses, they feel like every time they call the police, nothing's happening. And so we do need to strengthen these laws a little bit and give our police something to be able to do when they do show up. So I'm going to support all 3 of these. I do have one question as far as the median. I saw somebody had a question earlier about people protesting in medians, things like that. Now, I know that wouldn't be allowed. Is that a First Amendment violation?
Well, the First Amendment allows you to be on areas that are public forums and traditional public forums, sidewalks, etc. But a median is not designed for pedestrians to be there safely, isn't a public forum that you have to allow First Amendment speech on. And so the answer is no, we would enforce this, or I would urge that it be enforced uniformly. It doesn't matter if you're standing there because you like standing there, if you're standing there with a First Amendment sign, you're standing there soliciting, or you're camping out under an umbrella. Any of those three fact patterns would still be being in an unsafe location as defined by the ordinance. So no, the First Amendment activity would not shield you, is a better way of saying it, from enforcement.
In order to give Judge Randall the flexibility with some of the sentences and things like that, do we need to put extra wording into the ordinances? Because I know they say fine or jail time. Is there something else that we need to put into those in order to do that?
I don't think so, and I'd be curious what the department thinks. I think the only policy call that the council needs to make is, do you allow imprisonment or not as a penalty? And increasingly, I will say that for minor things like this, you're not going to get jail time from the judge in any reasonable way, and so imprisonment's not that useful to even have in the ordinance. The judge, I think, is perfectly capable of, within any fine regime, deciding what that should be, or an alternative sentence and alternative orders that I think the chief's probably more familiar with because he's seen the judge's activities more than I. So no, I don't think that you need to, unless the chief disagrees, I don't think you need to add any detail there. Rarely, as council is aware over the years, council has said on like nuisance violations and have asked for me to do an ordinance that puts increasingly higher minimum fines, first offense, second offense, third offense, that kind of thing. We could certainly do that here, but my sense, and I'd be curious what the chief thinks, my sense is that the nature of these offenses is pretty case by case and probably doesn't fall into a first, second, third offense. We've got to hit you harder, a kind of regime. And instead, I think I'd leave the judge free to evaluate the circumstances of each one, other than making the decision about allowing or not allowing jail. And I've given you my recommendation on that in the form of these drafts. I think you need to not try to be any more subtle than that. I think the judge has the ability to apply that, his judgment.
Mr. Dahl, the judge is on the call if he would like.
Good.
Would you like to opine on this issue?
Good
evening. Thanks, Jerry.
Welcome.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I would leave the general penalty provision in the ordinance. That is, it permits up to a fine up to a certain amount, in jail up to a certain amount. I think for the first time offender with no criminal history, a fine or an alternative sentence is appropriate. But I saw a gentleman today who had 8 trespasses. Of those 8, 4 were at the same location, and he had been trespassed by the police off that location numerous times. So I think for some repeat offenders who have a lengthy criminal history of trespassing, some amount of incarceration might be appropriate. But I think for the vast majority, something else is appropriate.
Judge, what I've done, just to follow up on that, is on the trespass ordinance, I have left it, or the present draft is fine or imprisonment. So you've got the whole range that you have. For the removing no trespassing sign and the sales and solicitations being in the median, I believe how I presently drafted it is a fine only, no jail. Do you have a thought or an opinion on that? I recognize that the code can say jail, but you don't obviously have to impose that. And the real question is, you're telling the council whether you'd like to have that option even if only occasionally used on those other ordinances. I think they'd
Yeah.
be very interested to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, as much flexibility and discretion as possible. Because you'll have cases that range from the one-time offender to the person who does this chronically in Wheat Ridge and chronically all over the metropolitan area.
Okay. I think that's helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important for us to kind of take a step back and look at the landscape within Wheat Ridge and how we've approached the issue of homelessness. And this isn't our first crack at the bat. This isn't the first thing that we've done to address the issue of homelessness. I believe Wheat Ridge has done the best approach that we can in addressing the issue of homelessness, in that we've provided both direct support for affordable housing in the case of the Fruitdale Lofts. We've partnered with agencies like the Jefferson County Housing Authority in our private activity bonds and the refinancing and reconstruction of Caesar Square. There's other projects that are in the pipeline as it relates to affordable housing in the city of Wheat Ridge. So we've taken that first step in making sure that we have affordable housing solutions either built or in the future being built. And then in addition to that, we've taken steps to create and fund a homeless navigator position. And I think that's important to note, that we've taken this step to create the homeless navigator position. And now we're looking at these issues of trespass and the stick of the enforcement side of things. And that's, I think, the most compassionate thing we can do is start with how we can support folks, but also provide the enforcement and the needed laws in place to make sure that folks know that certain behaviors and certain actions are not acceptable and not part of civil society. So to suggest, and I've seen others out in the community suggest, that Wheat Ridge is taking these particular actions against homelessness, and it's not really that. That's not really the case. What we're doing is sort of a very broad approach to dealing with this issue in a variety of different ways. And this is, I think, a very critical part of it, because it does show that we are concerned about public safety. And I've seen in instances where you have young children accompanying individuals experiencing homelessness in the public right of way, very close to fast moving cars. And that definitely scares me. And I think it should scare all of us. So public safety in this regard and the way that we've crafted this, I think, is appropriate and necessary, as evidenced by last Monday night's fatality. So this isn't us coming down on folks or being mean or criminalizing homelessness. It's making sure that we are being smart and protecting the public, both the pedestrians as well as the motoring public. I guess one of my questions for Mr. Dahl, the section 47, we're talking solely about notices or signs, but the previous section 47 that was instituted in 1995 dealt with the defacement of all public property in regards to gang graffiti. And so my question is why is it necessary to focus solely on the removal of signs as opposed to defacement of all public property? Why are we so honed in on that particular element of public property?
Good question. The present version of the code I have, unless I've got an outdated version, doesn't have a section 1647 at all. While there's other questions, I'll look quickly and see if defacement of public property things elsewhere in Title 16 probably. We certainly could consider combining that. I think the reason that it's part of this package, it doesn't have to be, but the reason it's part of this package is to be more supportive of a charge of trespassing, because there's been a notice, you were aware of that notice, and to try to make sure that the signs stay up, to be able to continue to give support to what the police department would be doing and charging. Having said that, council member, I don't disagree that, and I have to look quickly, I've got the code here and I will. If we can include it within a defacing public property generally, we can, although you'll notice that this particular ordinance as drafted makes it unlawful to remove any notice, whether on public property or private property. and that would depart from the defacing of public property ordinance if we have a separate one. I can certainly look at that in between now and when it comes back to you. There are a couple other things I've made notes about that I will want to fix in these before it's to you for action. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I have a similar question regarding 1645 in reference to posters, and it says it's unlawful for any person to intentionally tear down, deface, or cover up any lawfully posted advertisement or bill of any person or entity.
Yeah, I see that.
That would, in my mind, include us, and I would assume this would be a bill as opposed to an advertisement. But if that could be modified or changed to incorporate that new section 47. And
I agree with you.
My last question. Yeah. What were you doing on April 23rd, 2001?
Was I? My gosh, where is that?
That's the date that the section 47 was repealed, and you were at the Wheat Ridge City Council meeting.
I was, 2001. What's that? Well, I know what I was doing. I was sitting in council chambers that night. Other than that, I can't really tell you. Go look at the minutes of the council meeting, and then with any luck, I could answer that question.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Wasn't on Zoom, I can tell you that.
No, it was not.
Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I wanted to just kind of touch on this subject, as it is definitely a heavy issue in facing District 4 right now. I think the majority of my calls, emails, and messages on a regular basis has to do with something around this issue of homelessness. And I want to say that I'm very thankful for the way our city has handled this issue. I think we've really stepped in and been very empathetic and tried to help in the manners that we can. We've agreed to hire a homelessness navigator. We've implemented, affordable housing projects, as Councilmember Urban had mentioned. And, I really think that this is going to be a multiple pronged approach. This is definitely a community issue that we're going to have to be facing for, ongoing periods of time. And as far as the homelessness navigator goes, I know that we're going to be hiring them, or hopefully hiring them soon. I don't know exactly. We haven't really gotten an update on that, so I don't know how long that would be. But I think that with our police department coming to us and asking us of these tools and really having a very thorough and clear reason as to why, and I think these are issues, that I've mentioned, the pedestrians and the medians and being scared driving by I-70 in Kipling, with people stumbling around crossing the street when they're not at a crosswalk, or they don't even have a red light and traffic's not stopped. My dad called the police a few weeks ago because a gentleman was throwing bowling balls on the side of Kipling into traffic. At first he thought it was an inflatable ball, and then it hit a car. And so he did make a call to the police, and it was an ongoing issue with this person being in that area. And so I think, we've had residents call about safety concerns, whether it's with children or pedestrians in traffic. We've been having a lot of calls and thankfully community cleanups in these areas that we're facing these issues. And I think I would really like to move forward and support our community and our residents in their concerns, and providing our police department some of the tools that many of our neighboring municipalities are using. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my comments earlier were really geared towards the trespassing signage, and I've got some questions around the pedestrian ordinance that we're considering. So in general, I have a lot of concerns about so almost like criminalizing walking in neighborhoods in here. I realize we're trying to thread a needle, and I am usually the first person to call when there's, I live near 44th in Wadsworth, and there's oftentimes there's some church that likes to pop up some afternoons and solicit people. And I have anxiety attacks because they're like in the median and jumping in and out of traffic. And so so I'm very much in favor of the regulation of the median use, but I'm really concerned about sort of the slippery slope of hindering the flow of traffic. So my first question, I think, is for Mr. Dahl. With the way this is written, are section 1 and section 2 required together, or is it possible to look at, do we need section 1 for section 2 to have teeth, I guess is the most direct question. And you're on mute.
Right, sorry. Fair question. I'm looking at it quickly here. You are right that section 1 is sort of more general, and section 2 is a little more specific. I'm looking here kind of quickly. Let me look at the unlawful act. I think section 2 could stand on its own.
Okay.
It could.
I'm definitely concerned that section 1, while I understand the intent of it, really, we are a city without many sidewalks, and that includes on a lot of our major arterials. And I think that particular section, if it's not required, can create a slippery slope where people, you know, really are being criminalized for walking in their neighborhoods. So I would like to consider striking section 1 if it is not required for the efficacy of section 2. And the second thing within that is in section 2, under section 1670 B, the definitions.
Yes.
There, I understand the selection of 30 miles per hour. I'm really familiar with the fatality and serious injury rate that relates to how fast the cars drive, and really 25 miles per hour is a significant breaking point. I am concerned that at 30 miles per hour, we're literally making it illegal to, you know, 38th Avenue on west of Kipling is 35 miles per hour and does not have sidewalks, but on a small portion of it. So I think to maybe gain a little bit more clarity that we are talking about some of the heavier trafficked and higher speed roadways in our community, I'd like to consider changing that to 40 miles per hour, because really the impact of drivers when they are driving and pedestrians, you know, in our neighborhoods and on our collectors and minor arterials, we really should be looking at engineering standards and not criminalization of using those streets. The story of Telemundo of people crossing during that interview, to me, I don't know where the location was, but like that rings of infrastructure. When there are not crosswalks on large segments and people don't have places to cross, and when there aren't sidewalks, we're literally telling them that they can't like walk from where they live to school. So I just want to kind of be cognizant that what we're really looking at is our bigger streets that are heavily trafficked, and trying to stay away from regulating like 38th Avenue. And I think those were my big things within that.
One point about that, section 2 is exclusively roadway center medians, not sidewalks on either side, right? And that's fine. That's a policy call for council, but it is restricted to center medians. Regarding section 1, just for council to think about, in a little while you'll take consensuses to direct us to do things. We certainly could break section 1 into its own ordinance because it's a separate code section. That allows the council to kind of consider it separately, and then you can make decisions on it as you choose. That'd be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Mr. Stites has a question.
Ms. Hulteen, does that conclude your questions?
Yeah, I guess my only last request is it references that there's been an increase in conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles. And I don't think I've seen any data around that. So if the police department has any data specifically regarding year-over-year serious injuries and fatalities that have to do with pedestrians and bicyclists, I'd certainly be interested in seeing those. Thank you.
Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick follow-up question to Ms. Holtein's question there. If we're looking at section 1 versus section 2, can we just put maybe a speed limit into section 1? So like we have 30 for the medians in 2, could we put 30 in section 1 as well? So you wouldn't be able to block, say, Wadsworth or Kipling, but you could still walk on your residential streets? You're on
mute, Mr. Dahl.
We could, that could be done.
Okay.
We'd have to do a little reworking of the ordinance, I think, to make it, to have it's kind of the same structure as section 2, but it could be done.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with Ms. Holtein. We don't want to criminalize people walking in their neighborhoods, right? So we definitely don't want that, and I don't think that's the intent of this, but maybe just by defining what streets we're looking at, that might be.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. I've got you next, but I'd like to make a couple of comments because I think we're going to wrap this thing up pretty quick. But Mr. Dahl, I had just a couple of things. You didn't obviously draft this, but when I get to the first order about criminal trespass on your definitions, you include banks and beds of non-navigable water streams, and to me that might imply that we wouldn't be able to sort of get right to the banks of Clear Creek, and I certainly would think that we'd want to be able to be there.
I can certainly do that. Interestingly, that language is in our present code, 1646.
Is it?
But
I did a real, I sort of did a real quick Wikipedia look at what navigable waters were and non-navigable, and if you could float a canoe on it, I think it would be navigable. So,
and I think that probably includes Clear Creek, but or excuse me, yes, probably includes Clear Creek. But I think that from a police regulation standpoint, you still could extend trespass to Clear Creek as well. In fact, it might be best because there's really only that and the name of the gulch, which escapes me right this minute. Somebody help me.
Lena Galt.
Thank you. We might just name those because I think those are the only streams really within the city.
Well, just so that we include that area, and someone can say, well, that's a navigable waterway, and the other one on the next section just below that, it looks like in common areas we're talking about hotels, motel, condominiums, and apartment buildings. So, but I'm sure that you've got some more sort of technical changes to get this going.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Urban.
I think to Councilmember Holtein's point regarding the higher speed roadway, when we talk about a center median, I think it's inherent in having a center median that it would be a higher speed roadway, that we may not even need to define a higher speed roadway or use that language in the ordinance, that if there is a center median present, that would indicate a higher speed. I'm not certain where we would find a center median without adjacent streets being at least higher speed, because I can see situations where along Wadsworth, you might have individuals on the feeder streets that have center medians, but those feeder streets may not reach 30 miles an hour, or if we increase that higher roadway speed to 40 miles an hour, the feeder streets may not meet that mile per hour requirement. So if we could just stay focused on the center median aspect of it and either eliminate or not define the higher speed roadway, I'm not sure how that affects the efficacy of the ordinance, but I think that would solve that issue.
Ms. Holtein?
Thank you. I think I just want to mention, I don't know how they're defined, but there are traffic calming, along 41st Avenue and Teller. We do have areas in our community within neighborhoods that actually have what look like medians that are technically our parks because they're landscaped and maintained by our parks. But I do think that there's room for confusion on that within our neighborhoods. So I appreciate trying to figure that out. And I don't know the best solution for it, but I just want to be mindful that we do have medians on roads that are in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
And so I'd like to try to move forward a consensus. I saw Ms. Weaver raise her hand, but after that, I'd like to try to move forward a consensus.
Does that mean I can talk?
You may,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. And thank you, Mayor. I would agree. I want us to, I do realize that we need to deal with the homelessness issue. I am very concerned, not that anyone would ever do this in Wheat Ridge, but along 38th, it is very difficult without sidewalks. And I don't want to create a situation where one cannot walk safely along certain residential roadways. And just a quick mention to Mr. Dahl, not all of Lena Gulch is publicly accessible. And so just, I think it does sort of merit, it's not all waterways. And of course, the water rights issue comes into this as well, as far as what public access is. So I just want to thank Ms. Hulteen. I also want to thank Mr. Urban. I do think there are solutions to this, and I agree that this needs to move forward. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about, this is not an all size fits all solution. Thank you.
Mr. Goff?
You know, there is a section in that code that talks, section C, 1669C, unlawful act. It says it shall be unlawful for any person to willfully and unnecessarily hinder. Doesn't that provide enough discretion for the police department that people just walking in their neighborhood are not going to be criminalized? Jerry or
Yeah, Mr. Goff, just to respond to that, when I read that section, I thought, you know, that's the proper amount of discretion for officers to not get tangled up with folks who are walking their dogs along the roadway. And the intent is clear to me, but you know, I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. But I think it stands on its own.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Urban. Let's see if we can wrap it up.
I'd like to move forward a consensus to bring forward the ordinances concerning trespassing, unlawful removal of notices, and concerning pedestrians hindering the flow of traffic and pedestrian use of roadways, center medians, encompassing the concerns that presented by council members here tonight.
I'm not trying to do this, but I have a suggestion and I can't remember, do I wait till we vote for consensus or do I do it now?
Well, you know, it's a lot easier when Ms. Hoppy's here and she knows how to do this, but you know, would you accept a little discussion on your consensus, Mr. Urban?
Yeah, I mean, in the consensus, I said it in encompassing the concerns presented by council members.
Okay, Ms. Hulteen, how would we clarify that to get us to consensus?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Urban. I would like to consider removing section 1 and considering it as a standalone and not pertinent to the ordinance presented, the ordinance adopting section 1669 and 1670. I'd like to remove 1669 for tonight and bring it forward as a separate issue.
So we split section 1 and section 2 and bring them forward as separate items?
Yes, I guess I'm moving to remove section 69 for tonight's discussion.
Mr. Dahl, did you say that's already in our current code?
1669 is not.
Oh, it's not. It's new. Okay.
No, it's new. And so the policy call for council, and it's probably up to Mr. Urban, having made the consensus, but would be to either agree that section 1 comes out and I'll bring 3 ordinances forward. And one of them won't have section 1 in it, or we could make section 1 a separate ordinance and I'll bring 4 ordinances forward. And I think I'm hearing Councilmember Hulteen say, take out section 1 and bring 3 forward.
That's correct. That's what I'm proposing.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, then do we have consensus on that? Raise your hand. Okay, looks like we do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good presentation, good discussion. We, let's see, 6:30, 7:30. We can probably get through this, I think. Let's go to agenda item number 3. Is everybody okay moving on? Okay, we'll go to agenda item number 3, ordinance establishing local system for reviewing campaign finance complaints. Mr. Dahl, are you on tap on this also?
I am, and my job here is easier because my job is to introduce Jeff Wilson, who shows up on your screen as Ann Patinga, but it's actually Jeff Wilson. In a minute, Allie will promote Jeff because Jeff wrote this ordinance. Jeff is special counsel at our firm, and as you probably know, he was the general counsel of the Colorado Municipal League for many decades, and was involved in almost all of the election legislation that has been adopted or dealt with in the legislature for all that time. And as a result of the longstanding objection of the there's Jeff, as a result of longstanding dissatisfaction by the Secretary of State having to deal with municipal campaign finance complaints. You know, so-and-so, you know, did not file a report. So-and-so has a committee and they didn't, you know, register the committee. You all hear these complaints. Those in law have previously gone to the Secretary of State, who has never really liked having to deal with these and appointing hearing officers. And Secretary of State finally prevailed upon the legislature to pass a bill that supported the regulations adopted by the Secretary of State, moving those complaints back to municipalities, saying it's your problem, it's your election, it's your problem. And that's fine, but we need some kind of system for being able to receive those complaints and process them. And what Jeff has done is assembled such a system. And we do need that system in place. As elections take place in Wheat Ridge and there are complaints filed, we are no longer able to send those to the Secretary of State. And it would be the municipal clerk under the statute that will have to deal with these. And so we need to have tools in place and procedures for the clerk to be able to follow. And that is what Jeff has created. And Jeff, if you unmute yourself, we'll be able to have you make the description of this thing and answer any questions.
Mr. Wilson, thank you for joining us tonight under I guess, cover of a pseudonym. So, but pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your drafting on this ordinance, and you may tell our council about it.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be here. Jerry gave a pretty good summary of how we came to this place. It actually started in 2018 when the Federal District Court for Colorado threw out the enforcement mechanisms in the Fair Campaign Practices Act as unconstitutional. And in their ruling, they focused particularly on the fact that anybody, any Tom, Dick, and Harry off the street can file a complaint for violation of the FCPA. After much, as Jerry mentioned, there was a lot of back and forth with rulemaking at the Secretary of State's office, culminated in legislation in 2019, Senate Bill 232, which I've mentioned in the memo to you concerning this ordinance. What that said, and in Senate Bill 232, as Jerry mentioned, the legislature provided that all FCPA complaints will now go to the municipal clerk. And that predictably set off quite a scurry among municipalities, as we all, municipalities all over the state are trying to get a process in place to handle these complaints. In developing this ordinance, I looked at several of those and those municipal ordinances. No surprise, we're all conservative and everybody hews pretty close to the process that the legislature developed for state complaints, for the Secretary of State to handle complaints. I use the City of Centennial's ordinance as probably the main source of language for this ordinance, very close to Senate Bill 232. The critical element in these bills, in these ordinances, as well as in the state bill, is an interim process for evaluation of complaints, so that when every Tom, Dick, and Harry comes in, it doesn't automatically become a complaint and result in a hearing. There's an intermediate evaluation of the merits before the complaint proceeds through the process. I want to primarily answer questions that you have about this. I'm assuming that you've seen the memo in the packet. The ordinance basically has the first element adds some language to your code to make it clear which election laws apply to various sorts of elections in the city of Wheat Ridge, including the state initiative and referendum laws, the state recall statutes, and the state laws concerning the amendment of home rule charters. Then comes the method for third-party complaints, and by third party, that's the Tom, Dick, and Harry. This is not about complaints initiated by the clerk. This is complaints initiated by community members. The ordinance sets a 90-day string for a time frame within which the complainant has to file their complaint after being aware of the evaluation. At paragraph F of the ordinance is the initial review by the clerk, looking to see if the complaint is timely filed and specifies one or more violations. The clerk has 10 days to do that. The clerk takes a look at what the alleged violation is, and if it's one of these things that is often the focus of a Fair Campaign Practices Act complaint, late filing of a contribution or expenditure report or some such disclosure report, these sorts of violations can be cured by a subsequent filing, and both Senate Bill 232 and this ordinance provide for that. If the complaint cannot be cured or is not cured, a hearing can be set. The ordinance provides, beginning at paragraph H, for this hearing. It's an independent hearing. An independent hearing officer is used. Hearing must be held within 15 days unless an enlargement of time is given. Following the hearing, the hearing officer is authorized, if a violation is sustained, to impose various sorts of penalties. These are lifted right out of the Constitution. A double and up to 5 times the amount contributed, received, or spent in violation of the law is one possible penalty. $25 a day for violations, another possible penalty, and then various disclosure requirements. I think I could, I'll spare you going through the minutia of this ordinance. You've already had extensive conversation this evening. As I say, this ordinance is pretty garden variety compared to what other cities are doing. It fills a niche that we are obliged to fill under the state legislation. I could give you a soliloquy on how I think the General Assembly might have exceeded its authority, but maybe that's for another time. Now I'll just try to answer your questions, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. We'll start with Ms. Weaver.
Oh.
Ms. Weaver, did you have your hand up?
No, I did not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was appreciating the soliloquy at another point. Thank you so much for your explanation.
Well, thank you. All right. Do we have questions from Mr. Wilson or Mr. Dahl? Mr. Urban.
Sorry about that. I believe I've read in here, and I just want to clarify, this is solely relating to City of Wheat Ridge elections, referendums, initiatives, and things being generated out of the City of Wheat Ridge, and doesn't relate to special districts or county issues or other political entities. It's solely within our domain, so to speak.
That's correct. And beyond that, these complaints would only relate to the claims arising under the Fair Campaign Practices Act or Article 28 of the state constitution, which those two work together.
And the city clerk has a way to indicate that if a complaint comes in, is it like a mandatory reporting thing where he then has to refer a complaint that comes to him, or can he just simply say that that's none of our business and we're not touching that?
The latter, and that's a critical aspect of this ordinance. It's what was missing in the state rules as initially considered in the Holland case. Here, the complaint comes in and the clerk makes an independent evaluation of whether an actual violation is alleged and whether the complaint is timely filed.
And then as it relates to the fine or the debt or the judgment that's incurred, there's a year time frame that's allowed for that to be referred to a collection agency, or can it be collected after a year, or what happens? There was a mention of a year time frame.
Oh, yes, this is under paragraph T. In no event shall the city take any action, including referring the penalty to a collection agency. But not.
So they have to refer it before?
Yeah, it has to be referred within 1 year of the filing of the complaint.
Okay.
So you don't have old complaints, old collection actions. The election took place, let's process it and be done and move on, kind of thing.
The entire scheme, that's right, as Jerry said, the entire scheme of this ordinance is, if you have a complaint, you have to bring it within 90 days. If you bring the complaint, we make a quick determination of whether there's any there. If there is, then we proceed expeditiously to resolve the complaint and move on.
So then
there's no stale penalties.
Could the city then sell that judgment to the collection agency for a lesser amount, and the collection agency then goes after the respondent?
There's nothing in this ordinance that bears upon the city's prerogative to refer this or any other collection to a collection agency, only the 1 year limit. So if that's a custom in the city with other kinds of debts, I presume you could do that with this sort of obligation as well.
That's correct. And I think the city could do that without specifically stating it in the ordinance. That's kind of an administrative, okay, we've got a debt. How do we go about collecting it? Do we have Jerry Dahl's firm file some collection action? Do we hire someone? And that's something that's well within the administrative authority of the city to make happen in whatever ways, pardon me, seems to be the most efficient in the given case.
And so my last question is that on part R, it indicates candidates shall be personally liable for penalties imposed upon the candidates committee, but in the situation of a referendum or initiative or non-candidate related election, would a registered agent be also personally liable, or how would that situation play out?
Well, of course, there's not a candidates committee, of course. There's
like an issue committee. It's that kind of situation.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'd have to look. Again, this is something lifted right out of the Senate Bill 232 primarily. I know the issue, the ability to enforce campaign finance requirements on issue committees itself has been very much in flux lately. There's been a lot of litigation about at what level can you require any reporting at all by an issue committee. And to be honest with you, I don't know why issue committees aren't mentioned in here, but I'll look, see if I can get you an answer on that.
Jeff, one way of approaching that might be letter P as in Paul, parentheses 1. That's kind of general authority to impose a civil penalty, and it doesn't say on who. So I guess if I were the hearing officer, I'd say, okay, looks to me like the violation here was this committee, this issue committee, this whatever committee. I'm imposing this penalty. on the committee. Now, that doesn't get you to personal liability of committee members, I think, unless you really say so.
Right.
But that's kind of a start. It may be that we should look into what, if anything, we can recommend for personal liability backing up penalties assessed as against a committee. We might want to do that at least.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. If it absent a specification in the ordinance of personal liability, as there is in the case of candidates, and the candidate is personally liable if for penalties imposed on the candidate committee, but presumably by omission, penalties imposed on an issue committee are just, paid by the committee itself out of the committee's assets. But I'll look.
Yeah, but I guess my reason for asking that is obvious in the sense that it seems we would have more issues coming out of an issue committee with respect to campaign finance issues than we would from a candidate, because the candidate's reputation's on the line, and an issue committee is going to, come and go, and they'll have no assets and they'll be gone as soon as the election's over. So that's where I think we need to have more personal liability than with the candidate, because presumably the candidate's going to be here after the election.
Fair enough. We'll follow up on that.
Thank you. Mr. Stites?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a real quick question. Because our clerk is elected, what if there's a complaint against him or her?
That was exactly my question.
Let's see, we already have fortunately, we already have a provision for an independent hearing officer here,
So that's the person who would assess the complaint?
Yes.
And is this retroactive? Would this be retroactive to when the state statute was passed? In other words, we can't have an ex post facto law.
No.
Okay.
No, it would, whatever, Jerry, 30 days after approval on second reading?
15 days after final publication.
Oh, okay, all right.
So no, it's on a going forward basis. And to the extent there were a complaint against the clerk, that's a perceptive question, because of course there are all of 2 or 3 elected city clerks in the state. So, but if there were to be such a complaint that would come in, I'd advise the city clerk, well, you have a conflict here. You need to refer this to a hearing officer who would then take all the actions. I think we'd be fine there.
And it'd have to happen pretty early in the process, because of course the clerk couldn't be making the initial determination of the sufficiency of a complaint regarding the clerk.
And probably couldn't be, have influence in who the hearing officer was.
So in that extraordinary situation, as Jerry said, you'd have to go somewhere else.
We're an extraordinary little city with an elected clerk. Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to make this as clear as possible, because it's about as clear as mud. Can you mention what some of the violations are for the Fair Campaign Practices Act?
You bet. It is pursuant to the Fair Campaign Practices Act that candidates are required to form issue committees. They're required to keep track and itemize contributions, I believe in excess of $20 received by their campaign committees. They're then required to file periodic reports. Perhaps you had to do this, Councilwoman, during your election, of monies received or spent in periods before the election and then periods after the election. There are requirements in the Fair Campaign Practices Act and in the Constitution concerning disclosure requirements for folks engaged in what are known as electioneering communications and independent expenditures and such. All of these requirements come with penalties if you fail to comply. And the Constitution permits third parties to initiate complaints alleging violations of these campaign finance laws. And it's that very practice that the court addressed in the Holland case that gave rise to all of this this legislation and rulemaking and brings us to where we are now. I hope that was responsive.
Thank you. So it doesn't really have anything to do with conflict of interest.
It does not.
Okay. And nothing, there's no limit on the amount of money that can be spent.
There is not. There are limits on contributions in the state law as to certain state candidates, but none applying to candidates in municipalities, and certainly not in a home rule municipality.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Urban?
Sorry about that. I had a question on page 6, P2. It was talking about the civil penalty of $25 for each day that a statement or other information required to be filed is not filed. So in that instance where I have a report due on a particular day, if I just fax in a piece of paper that says this is the statement I'm supposed to file and send that in with that sentence on it, technically I've filed a piece of paper that's not accurate, it's not complete, but I did file a piece of paper on that day. Does that meet the requirements of P2, or does it have to be accurate or complete?
I believe it does meet the requirements, and there are separate penalties for improper filing. The penalty is for simply failing to file altogether.
Okay. So I'd like to make a consensus to move this forward if anybody else has any questions.
I had the one other thing, Mr. Wilson, is there an appeal from the hearing officer? Or the hearing officer is the final verdict?
There is an appeal, Mr. Mayor. At paragraph Q, it's provided the hearing officer's determination under subsections O and P is a final decision, subject to review under Rule 106 of the Rules of Civil Procedure. So there is an appeal.
Okay.
It's the final decision at the city level. If you're dissatisfied with the hearing officer's decision, you have to file a case in district court.
Thank you. Do we have consensus to move this forward?
I'd like to make a motion or make a consensus to move forward the complaint and hearing process for election complaints.
Okay. Looks like we have consensus on that. Thank you much, Mr. Wilson, and nice to see you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Dahl, thank you for your work on this also. All right, that finishes item number 3. Let's go to item number 4, elected officials reports. We'll do this by voluntary hand raising. Ms. Weaver and then Ms. Nosler-Beck.
I would just like to report that the pig owner was found later on Monday night after I announced it. So I think pig and owner have been reunited. But I just want to thank code enforcement and Foothills and everybody who helped get the pig home.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nosler-Beck.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the city staff. I ran into my kid's former teacher from a Montessori school, and they're going to be moving in across the street from Bardo, and I ran into her today, and she just said that the whole process of moving into Wheat Ridge has been just amazing and smooth, and the staff has been so communicative, even if there are things that jam them up. And she compared it to their experience with Denver, and she just said that we have an incredible staff that's super responsive. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm really excited about the new school coming in because it's not just preschool age, but it goes down to infants. So it'll be great for families. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to mention I was contacted by a student at Metro State who is trying to get a master's in social work. She's doing an internship at Stevens Elementary. And they have an area there at that school where they have a food pantry, clothing, school supplies, This is an area that is open to all students in Wheat Ridge. It's not just at Stevens. So because of COVID, they're on Facebook, and they also state to call Stevens to find out about it if people are needing things. What they are asking for is like winter kind of shoes, boots, and also reusable grocery bags. And I'll bring this up at City Council also. So it's for all of the city, for all kids in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further elected officials reports? Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to mention I had a chance to stand in the back of the room during Division Chief Pickett's retirement celebration the other day, and he's done great service to our community. I heard moving stories and very funny stories, and I was just really reminded, being in the room, of what an outstanding police department we have, and you can really sense the genuine camaraderie and the sense of pride they have in serving our city. And it was an honor to be there, and I'm just really grateful for specifically Pickett, but really all of our Wheat Ridge Police Department. So.
All right. Any further elected officials matters? All right. Stay safe out there. Stay distant from one another, and wash your hands and wear a mask, and take care of one another as you can. So thank you all very much for joining us. We will be back at our full city council meeting 1 week from tonight on, let's see, that would be the 26th of October at 7 p.m. So thank you all very much for joining us. Mr. Urban, did you have something new? Just waving by. Okay, thanks so much.
Be
Bye-bye.
safe.